The morning sun sliced across the Manhattan skyline, reflecting like a blade off the mirrored surface of Grant Enterprises' tower, a monument to power and precision inside its penthouse office. High above the city's noise and chaos, Maxwell Grant stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, motionless. At 52, the billionaire CEO of Grant Enterprises embodied control. His suit was flawless, his hair silver-streaked and combed with military precision, his gaze sharp and dispassionate. From this height, the city looked small, manageable, just the way he liked it. Behind him, the office was pristine and cold, as if a museum exhibit on power. Victoria Chen, his executive assistant of 20 years, entered without knocking. She had long since earned that right. "Your 9 o'clock canceled. The Tokyo investors want an answer before noon," she said, tablet in hand. Without turning, Maxwell replied, "Tell them we're in. Move the afternoon budget meeting. I want to review the European reports before we decide." Victoria nodded, typing briskly, but paused unusual for her. Maxwell noticed instantly. "Something else?" he asked, eyebrow raised. "The charity committee sent up a new event, an orphanage fundraiser next Thursday, Riverdale Home for Children," she said. Maxwell's jaw tightened slightly. "I've already committed to 5 this quarter. That's sufficient." But Victoria didn't back down. "They specifically requested your presence, not just a donation. The board thinks it'll help soften the optics after the factory closure backlash." Maxwell looked back at his reflection. In the glass, not the city, but the man. Perfect suit, perfect empire, and eyes that had grown cold. 2 hours. No more, he said. That evening, the black Bentley waited in the underground garage. As the city gave way to the quiet, manicured streets of Westchester, Maxwell reviewed contracts on his tablet, his driver Harrison saying nothing. The estate came into view, a sprawling modern mansion behind wrought iron gates, a feat of architecture and emptiness. Inside, everything was immaculate. The cleaning service had left fresh flowers. A fire had been laid, but not lit. There were 18 chairs around a dining table no family had ever used. In the kitchen, a masterpiece of granite and stainless steel. He poured himself a measure of Macallan 25. He carried the crystal tumbler to his study, the only room in the house that felt remotely alive. On the walls were portraits not of family, but of Edison, Carnegie, Rockefeller, men who had built empires. Behind a stack of financial journals at a small silver photo frame, Maxwell picked it up, brushing away a thin film of dust. The woman inside smiled softly, her dark curls wild, her eyes luminous with youth and hope. Rebecca. She had vanished from his life without warning decades ago, leaving only a note. "I'm sorry, Maxwell. I can't do this anymore." She had been the only person he ever truly wanted, and the one thing he failed to keep later, in his cavernous bedroom. Maxwell lay in his king-size bed, alone. As always, "Lights off," he said. The room went black, and the silence pressed in like a weight. His eyes remained open. Tomorrow would bring more deals, more millions, more of the same. What he didn't know was that in 3 days, everything he built would be irreversibly changed for children no one else wanted. On Thursday evening, the Bentley pulled up to a weathered brick building with chipped paint and sagging window frames. Riverdale Home for Children. Maxwell straightened his tie. Beside him, Claudia Porter from PR reminded him, "Just a few photos with the kids, your speech, and the check presentation." He nodded curtly. Inside, streamers lined the walls and handmade signs welcomed him. 30 children sat cross-legged on the floor, their eyes scanning him with polite skepticism. He delivered his speech flawlessly about community, responsibility, investing in the future. The cameras flashed. He smiled his rehearsed smile. After the check was handed over, the orphanage director, Mrs. Winters, approached. "Would you like a quick tour?" she asked. Claudia opened her mouth to decline, but Maxwell cut her off. A short tour would be fine. They walked through faded hallways with peeling linoleum and outdated lighting. Children passed by, staring. At the end of a quiet corridor, Mrs. Winters opened a door. "This is our special projects room. Inside, for children work separately, but in harmony." A teenage girl with intelligent eyes helped a younger boy with math. A small girl painted in bold strokes with remarkable focus. Another boy was assembling a model from wires and bottle caps. "These are our long-term residents," Mrs. Winters explained softly. "Emily, Daniel, Sophie, and Michael. They're a package deal. Emily refuses to be separated from her siblings. It's made placement nearly impossible." Maxwell watched. Then, oddly transfixed. Why weren't they at the presentation? He asked. Emily has anxiety in crowds. The others, they tend to make people uncomfortable. But they're bright, resourceful. Their time is almost up. And then, Maxwell asked, they'll be split into different foster homes, Mrs. Winter said. Just then, Emily looked up and met his gaze, steady, challenging. Are you the rich man everyone cleaned for? She asked. Emily, Mrs. Winter snapped, but Maxwell smiled faintly. Yes, I suppose I am. Daniel, watching him like a scientist studying a subject, asked, why do you care about this place? The question hung in the air. For a moment, Maxwell had no answer. Then the youngest, Sophie, approached quietly. Her curls bounced as she held up a slightly wrinkled painting. It showed for children holding hands. One figure, an adult, was sketched but incomplete. It's not finished, she said shyly. I can't get the daddy right. Maxwell took the painting. The edges were rough, the colors uneven, but it was real. Something stirred in him. Something he couldn't name. Something that scared him. He turned to Mrs. Winters. His voice was calm, but different now, less polished, more human. I'd like to discuss adoption options. The east wing of Maxwell Grant's Westchester estate had been, until now, nothing more than unused square footage, marble floors, and high-tech smart systems collecting dust under the watchful eye of motion sensors. But now, it buzzed with the faint sounds of drills, paint rollers, and the distant scent of possibility. What had once been a display of architectural prestige was being transformed into something Maxwell had never planned for: a home. Contractors moved with clinical speed, walls repainted in navy and silver for Emily, bookshelves built into Daniel's room, a corner transformed into a mini studio for Sophie's art, and musical decor carefully installed around a small keyboard in Michael's quiet sanctuary. Maxwell watched the transformation from a distance, arms crossed, jaw tight, mind racing faster than it had during any hostile takeover he had faced. Down foreign governments, crushed international competition, and been lauded as a titan of industry. Yet the idea of being responsible for damaged, defensive children made his hands shake every time he reached for his coffee. They arrived on a rainy Tuesday. Four figures emerged from the orphanage van, huddled beneath oversized coats and guarded expressions. Emily led the charge, her arms tense across her chest, chin high. Daniel followed, gripping a backpack like it held nuclear codes. Sophie clutched a tattered sketchbook to her chest, curls frizzed from the mist. Michael trailed last, silent, unreadable, his eyes scanning every detail with hawk-like focus. Maxwell met them at the grand staircase. The foyer echoed with the children's hesitant steps. The housekeeper, Mrs. Harper, stood just behind him, hands clasped tightly as if bracing for impact. Emily's eyes locked onto Maxwell's. The same directness from the orphanage. She said nothing. I'm glad you're here, Maxwell said, and for once, his voice lacked the executive polish. Welcome home, is it, though? Emily said, her voice soft, not rude, just honest. Home? The question didn't require an answer. That first week unraveled Maxwell's carefully ordered life like a frayed suit thread yanked to hard. Daniel dismantled the smart thermostat to understand its wiring. Sophie spilled acrylic paint on a custom $30,000 rug. Michael removed the protective covers from the floor vents because they made a humming noise he disliked. Emily disappeared for hours at a time, retreating into corners of the house like a shadow, leaving behind only open windows and the occasional torn page of poetry. Maxwell, once a man whose days were plotted in 6-minute increments, found himself negotiating cereal preferences, bedtime resistance, and what he learned was a very serious sibling pact no one talks about before. One night, just before midnight, a thunderstorm struck, the kind that rattled the windows and cracked open the sky. Maxwell had been reviewing a quarterly earnings report when Mrs. Harper knocked gently at his study door. It's Sophie, she said. She's inconsolable. Storms. Maxwell hesitated. What was he supposed to do? He didn't know lullabies. He hadn't been hugged by a child since, ever. Still, something compelled him to go. He found Sophie curled beneath her blankets, whispering something he couldn't quite hear. Sophie, he said gently. Her voice was barely audible. I want Emily. She's asleep. Can I help instead? She peeked out with wide eyes. Do you know the Thunder song? I don't, he admitted. But could you teach me? She hesitated, then nodded. In a trembling voice, she sang, Thunder is just clouds playing drums. They're loud 'cause they're far, not because they come. Close your eyes, count to 3. You're safe inside, here with me. Maxwell repeated the lines with her, his voice deep and off-key, but steady. By the 3rd time through, Sophie's eyes were drifting shut, her breathing even, when he turned to leave. Emily was standing in the doorway. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I wanted to." Her arms were crossed, but her expression had softened barely. "She hasn't sung that song since our mom died." Maxwell's heart tightened. "I'm sorry. She never let anyone else sing it with her," Emily said, and then disappeared down the hall. That was the first crack in the wall. The next came when Daniel returned from school with a detention slip for correcting his science teacher in front of the class. When Maxwell asked what happened, Daniel opened a notepad and began sketching diagrams to explain why the periodic table should be reordered based on orbital theory. Maxwell didn't scold. He asked questions. That night, Daniel slipped a hand scribble paper under Maxwell's office door. "Thank you for not making me feel wrong." A few days later, Sophie presented a new painting at breakfast. 5 figures under a white oak tree, holding hands. The figure representing Maxwell was clearer now. He had eyes. "He's not finished yet," she said, tapping his face. "But I think I'm getting close." Maxwell couldn't speak. He simply nodded. Michael remained the mystery. He said little, but watched everything. One morning, Maxwell left his phone charging in the kitchen. When he returned, Michael was sitting with it, not playing games, but organizing the calendar. He looked up and said simply, "Your board meeting overlaps with Emily's writing competition. You'll be late if you don't move it." He was right. Emily was the last wall, the oldest, the most cautious. Late one night, Maxwell found her in the library, a stack of college brochures spread out in front of her. "Yale, Princeton, Columbia." "Ambitious," he said. She didn't look up. "Just research. You'll get in anywhere you apply." She scoffed. "You don't even know me." "I'm trying," he said. "If you'll let me." Emily paused. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, "Most people stop trying." "I won't." Their eyes met. A thread of understanding finally tugged taut between them. By the end of the 2nd week, the mansion was louder, messier, and somehow warmer. The children began saying his name without being prompted. They stopped, flinching when he entered a room. They left things behind in shared spaces, books on the stairs, shoes by the fireplace. Signs of life, signs of belonging. One afternoon, as he returned from a meeting, Maxwell passed the east hallway and saw all 4 kids sprawled on the living room carpet laughing in his house, a sound he hadn't realized had been missing all these years. He stood at the threshold and watched, a stranger in his own home, a home that was, slowly, becoming something else. And then came the dinner where Sophie asked, mid-macaroni bite, "Maxwell, is it okay if I call you something else?" He froze. Emily looked up sharply. Daniel paused mid-chew. Michael watched without blinking. Maxwell cleared his throat. "What did you have in mind?" Sophie looked at her siblings, then whispered, "Maybe, Dad?" The silence that followed was thunderous. Maxwell's chest tightened not with fear, but with something dangerously close to joy. "You can," he said, voice breaking just slightly. "You all can, if you want." Emily didn't say anything, but she didn't leave the table either. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet, and the rooms echoed not with emptiness, but with dreams, Maxwell sat in his study, the unfinished painting from Sophie resting beside him. The father figure's face still wasn't complete, but he was getting closer. So was she. So were all of them. Autumn rolled into Westchester like an old friend bringing gifts, crimson leaves, crisp air, and the subtle invitation to slow down. For the first time in Maxwell Grant's life, he found himself accepting that invitation. The mansion, once a silent monument to achievement, was now alive with the messy music of family, laughter echoing down the halls, doors slamming in teenage frustration, the hum of sibling debates over board games and bedtime snacks. Maxwell, once allergic to noise, began to crave it when it was absent. Every morning brought small rituals: Sophie's daily art update, Daniel's fact of the day, Michael's observational check-in delivered with surgical precision, and Emily's curt nod from across the breakfast table, which had slowly evolved into an actual good morning. Victory came in fragments, but while Maxwell's home filled with warmth, his heart remained wary, haunted by something just out of reach. There were cracks he couldn't explain, strange echoes in his memories, and one question that gnawed at him when the lights were off. Why these four? Why did he feel like he'd always known them? That question grew louder the day Victoria entered his office. Carrying a thin envelope marked personal nitrogen monoxide return address, it came to the house. She said. The handwriting looked familiar. Maxwell took it without ceremony, but his heart rattled against his ribs. He didn't open it immediately. He stared at it all through lunch, through Daniel's enthusiastic recounting of a biodiversity project, through Sophie's insistence that her painting finally got the daddy's eyes right. Only when the children were asleep, their breath like waves through the mansion, did he open the envelope. Inside was a newspaper clipping, faded and yellow. His face stared back at him 25 years younger, sharper, colder, announcing his first major acquisition. Below the article, in looping, unmistakable handwriting, was a single line. You became exactly who you always wanted to be. I hope it was worth it. Or no signature. No contact. Just a whisper from a ghost he had never stopped loving. Rebecca. Maxwell dropped into his study chair as if struck. His mind spun back to dorm rooms and stolen kisses. Midnight ramen and whispered dreams. The woman who had vanished without warning, who had left him nothing but a cryptic goodbye and a hole that no success ever filled. Why now? He didn't tell the children. Not yet. How could he? They were just starting to trust him. He feared the truth might undo the fragile tapestry they were weaving together. But his curiosity turned to obsession. He sent Victoria to search every database, birth records, missing persons reports, social media, former roommates, art galleries, anything. All he found were shadows, a Rebecca Wilson here, a Winters there. But the trail was ice cold. Then, 3 days later, Maxwell received another surprise. He returned home to find Emily sitting in his study chair, a stack of open brochures around her, and a hard look in her eyes. I found her, she said. Maxwell's mouth went dry. Who? Our birth mother, or at least her name, Rebecca Wilson. The air stilled. Wilson, he repeated. Double quotes. Yes. She died giving birth. Hospital records list her age, but almost nothing else. No father listed. No extended family found. She was alone. Maxwell swallowed hard. Where did you find this? I've been searching since we moved here, Emily admitted. Quietly, I needed to know who we came from. I wasn't sure I'd even tell you. A long pause passed between them. She died. Maxwell asked, voice low. Emily nodded. 26 years old. For children, no one claimed her body. Maxwell looked at her and saw Rebecca's fire in her eyes, her posture, even her cadence. Suddenly, a memory bloomed in his mind, one he had buried for decades. A 21st birthday. A gift box wrapped in green ribbon. Rebecca's laugh as she handed it to him, teasing, don't open it yet. One day, you need what's inside. That box, he still had it. He found it buried beneath tax files and shareholder prospectuses in the attic, its brass clasp still intact. With trembling fingers, he opened it. Inside were photographs, Rebecca painting, Rebecca asleep on his shoulder, Rebecca looking straight into the camera, as if challenging the future itself. And at the bottom, a sealed envelope. Maxwell, for when you're ready. He opened it slowly, the paper brittle with age. Her handwriting curled across the page like music he hadn't heard in years. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to vanish, but I knew you better than anyone. If I told you I was pregnant, you would have given up everything, your dreams, your empire. You would have chained yourself to me out of duty. And I loved you too much to be your burden. I didn't think I'd die. But if I do, and if you ever find them, tell them I didn't give them away. I gave them a chance. I gave them you. I pray that the world leads them back to you, to someone who will never stop fighting, someone who can give them what I couldn't. They're your children, Maxwell, all four. Love them like I would have. Rebecca. Maxwell read the letter 3 times. His hands shook. His breath caught. He stood and collapsed back into his chair like gravity had tripled. The children weren't just a second chance. They were his flesh, his blood. All this time, the instinct, the familiarity, the ick when they spoke or laughed or cried, it wasn't imagined. It was memory. He stared at the mansion around him, suddenly seeing it with new eyes. Not a rescue mission, not an act of redemption, a reunion. That night, Maxwell didn't sleep. He sat outside Sophie's door for an hour, listening to her soft, even breathing. He peeked into Daniel's room and saw schematics for a homemade wind turbine. Michael's door was slightly ajar, jazz piano drifting from a small speaker. And Emily's light was still on. She was writing. He didn't tell them that night. Not yet. But everything had changed. He looked at Rebecca's letter one last time before locking it in the safe. There would be time to tell them, but first, he had to become the man she believed he could be. A man worthy of a second chance. A man worthy of their love. It began with a tremor, not in the earth, but in Maxwell's hand, barely noticeable. A flicker of weakness as he signed off on a strategic merger deal that should have excited him. His pen scratched across the page, but for the first time in years, he missed the signature line. He stared at it in silence. Victoria noticed immediately. "You've been pale all morning," she said later, frowning as she passed him a protein smoothie he hadn't requested. "You haven't touched your lunch. You're skipping words and meetings." Maxwell waved it off. "Jet lag. I was up all night reviewing the Tokyo files." But by that evening, the tremor had spread. While reviewing Daniel's science fair prototype, a solar-powered water purifier designed using household materials, Maxwell felt a sudden dizziness. The room tilted. His grip loosened. The tumbler of water crashed to the floor, shattering like glass nerves. The last thing he remembered was Daniel's panicked voice shouting, "Dad!" He woke in a hospital bed, a dull ache thudding in his bones. The lights above were bright. His mouth was dry. There was a weight in the room beyond the sterile scent and quiet monitors. Victoria sat in the corner, stiff-backed and silent, and beside him, clutching his hand with surprising strength, was Daniel. "You scared us," Daniel said, his voice too calm for a 16-year-old. "You collapsed during a video call. I rode in the ambulance with you." Maxwell tried to speak, but his throat caught. Dr. Abrams entered. Her expression told him everything before she said a word. "Mr. Grant," she said, her tone gentle but clinical, "your blood work revealed several abnormalities. White cell count is high, platelets dangerously low. The MRI shows masses in your bone marrow. We need to do a biopsy to confirm, but it strongly indicates leukemia." The word landed like a grenade. Daniel's hand tightened. "There are treatments, right?" "There are," Dr. Abrams said. "Aggressive chemotherapy, possibly radiation." But she hesitated. "But your best option may be a bone marrow transplant. That gives you the highest chance of remission. For that, we'll need a genetic match. Siblings are usually the best hope, or biological children." Maxwell closed his eyes. "Biological." The word echoed like a secret trying to scream. "Do you have any blood relatives?" Dr. Abrams asked. Maxwell looked at Daniel, this brilliant, analytical boy who had brought models of fusion energy to science class and memorized Beethoven symphonies in his spare time. He looked at him not just as a son, but as a living answer to a question he hadn't known to ask. "I think I might," he said quietly. He waited until they were home to gather them. The children were sprawled across the library sofa, curled up in sweatshirts and blankets. Emily, freshly back from college for fall break, balanced a law textbook on one knee. Michael was sketching in a music notebook. Sophie was embroidering a pillow with the word home in bright pink thread. Maxwell stood before them, hollowed out, but trying to be whole. "I need to tell you something," he began, "and I need you to listen all the way through." They looked up as one. Even Michael stopped sketching. He took a deep breath. "First, the doctors think I have leukemia." The air froze. Sophie's lip trembled. Emily immediately sat upright. Daniel didn't speak, his knuckles widened around the armrest. "But there's a treatment," Maxwell continued quickly. "The best option is a bone marrow transplant. That's why I'm telling you this now. I've already been tested, but to increase my odds, they need to test all of you." They glanced at one another, confused, concerned, but nodding. "We'll do it," Daniel said immediately. "You don't even have to ask. We're your kids," Emily added, her voice cracking. "Of course." Maxwell looked down. "No, you're more than that." They stared. Maxwell moved slowly to his desk and pulled out the envelope. He handed it to Emily. "It's time you knew everything." Inside was Rebecca's letter. Emily read aloud, her voice starting strong, but trembling by the final lines. "They're your children, Maxwell. Offer, love them like I would have. Rebecca." The silence afterward was suffocating. "You knew her?" Emily asked, her voice tight. Maxwell nodded. "She was my entire world once. At university, we lost touch, or I thought we did. I didn't know about any of you. She left to protect my future." Daniel spoke next, his words clinical, but cracking. You're our biological father. Yes, Maxwell said, throat tightening. All four of you. You're not just my children by choice. You're mine by blood. Sophie dropped the pillow. Her eyes were wide, stunned, searching. You're our real dad? I didn't know. He whispered. I swear to you, I didn't know until recently, but I felt it. I think that's why I couldn't walk away at Riverdale. Why I couldn't let you go. Michael stood. For a moment, Maxwell thought he might leave the room. Instead, he walked over and placed his small hand in Maxwell's. You came anyway, Michael said. Even before you knew. Emily was crying now. All this time, we thought we were just a second chance to you, but we were always your first. The tests were run the next morning. Dr. Abrams was stunned. Not only were all four children compatible, but their profiles were rare perfect matches. Daniel, in particular, had the strongest donor profile she had ever seen. It's like they were designed to save you, she whispered, shaking her head. Later that night, Maxwell lay in his recovery suite while Emily organized his medical documents, and Daniel revised his donor schedule like a project engineer. Sophie painted a mural of a bone marrow cell wrapped in golden vines, calling it healing. Michael sat silently beside his father, playing a quiet piece he'd composed himself. The melody was haunting, sad, and full of hope. Maxwell said softly, do you hate me for not knowing sooner? Michael didn't look up. He kept playing. I think some people never find their real family, but we found ours 2 nights before the surgery. Maxwell couldn't sleep. He wandered to the attic again, now more shrine than storage space. He found an old photo of him and Rebecca laughing on the roof of their university dorm, the city lights behind them. He pressed the photo to his heart. I found them, Rebecca, he whispered. They're everything you hoped they'd be, and more. Downstairs, Emily had fallen asleep grading mock college essays for underprivileged students. Sophie was asleep in a bean bag near the mural. Daniel was rereading transplant protocols on his tablet. Michael had dozed off mid-composition. Maxwell stood at the landing and watched them. His blood, his miracles, his redemption. The morning of the transplant dawned unnaturally still. A pale gray light filtered through the high windows of the Grant mansion, painting everything in soft shadows. Outside, the trees stood motionless. No birdsong, no breeze, just silence as if nature itself was holding its breath. Inside the east wing, a makeshift medical suite had been prepared with the precision of a private hospital. Maxwell lay beneath crisp white linens, monitors humming softly at his side. His once broad shoulders had thinned. His face, always commanding, was now pale and hollowed, like a statue weathered by time, but his eyes remained unbroken. Across from him, Daniel stood in a hospital gown, flanked by Dr. Abrams and her surgical team. He was calm, methodical, and anchor in a storm of uncertainty. You sure you're ready, kid? Maxwell asked, voice raspy but steady. Daniel nodded. I've read everything, risks, benefits, recovery projections. Statistically speaking, we've got this. Maxwell managed a smile. Statistically speaking, we shouldn't have found each other. Daniel hesitated, then whispered, but we did. Emily stood near the doorway, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She had barely slept in days, coordinating medical logistics and legal protections. Sophie had refused to leave Maxwell's side and now sat curled in a chair, a ragged stuffed lion in her lap. Michael, silent as ever, was sketching on his tablet every now and then glancing up, recording everything, processing it the only way he knew how. Let's begin, Dr. Abrams said gently. Maxwell reached out a weak hand. Daniel. The boy stepped forward. Maxwell placed his palm over his son's. You're not just giving me a chance to live, Maxwell whispered. You're giving me a chance to stay with you. Daniel blinked hard. You better stay. Then the door swung open. The surgical team moved in with quiet urgency. The children were ushered out. The transplant lasted 7 hours. 7 hours of silence in the waiting area. 7 hours of pacing and whispered prayers. 7 hours where Sophie sang the thunder song to herself on loop like a spell. 7 hours where Emily read the same paragraph of her psychology textbook 39 times without turning the page. 7 hours where Michael didn't speak a single word, but his hand never stopped drawing. When Dr. Abrams finally emerged, mask pulled down and face unreadable, all four children rose at once. She smiled. The procedure was successful. The transplant is complete. Now we wait. Recovery was its own storm. Maxwell's immune system was reduced to zero. His body a battlefield of cell regeneration and rejection risk. Weeks passed in a haze of fevers, transfusions, and isolation protocols, but his children never wavered. Emily, transformed into a commander tracking medications, administering schedules, barking orders at nurses when they moved too slow. Her Columbia coursework had shifted to remote, but her mind was here, rooted in care. Sophie decorated the recovery room with new art everyday cell structures as flowers. IMMUNE cells drawn like warriors. She painted Maxwell's for stand to look like a tree. Michael installed a camera in the ceiling and created a private live stream for Maxwell to watch his children from his bed, so you never feel like you're not with us, he said simply, and Daniel, though recovering from his own procedure, never left Maxwell's side for long. He brought research articles and experimental recovery techniques, charting every data point in a handmade journal labeled Dad Metrics. Maxwell watched them from his bed with silent awe. They had become a family not in name, but in instinct. But then came day 17. The fever returned. Violently. Maxwell slipped into delirium. Monitors shrieked. Dr. Abrams rushed in. Emily was called from a food run and dropped her coffee mid-street when her phone rang. Sophie began crying before anyone told her why. Michael turned gray and locked himself in the piano room. Daniel refused to speak to anyone. Dr. Abrams pulled them aside that night. We knew there was a risk. His body may be rejecting the transplant, or it may be fighting something we can't yet detect. We're doing everything, but I need you to prepare. No one cried. Not then. They went back to the mansion. It felt like walking through a museum of memories, every hallway heavy with moments they feared might become the last. Then Sophie said something that changed everything. He told me, if we ever got lost in a storm, to build a fort. Emily blinked. What? He said that's what families do. Make shelter together. Emily's eyes narrowed. Then that's exactly what we'll do. That night, the mansion transformed. The East Wing became a fortress not of medicine, but of memory and love. Blankets and pillows were piled into corners. Flashlights dangled from furniture. They played recordings of Sophie's lullabies, Daniel's lectures, Emily reading aloud from Rebecca's favorite books. Michael's custom video stream now showed the family in real time laughing, crying, breathing together. And they wrote him letters. Every one of them. Emily's was fierce. You don't get to leave. Not now. Not when we've just begun. Daniel's was precise. Statistically, your odds improve with direct exposure to stimuli. So here we are. Stimuli. Michael's was a drawing. The five of them, holding hands, surrounded by music notes and tiny lightning bolts. Sophie's was a painting of Maxwell's heart with 4 vines wrapping around it. We're inside now, she wrote, so it's not allowed to break. They slipped the letters under his hospital door. The next morning, Dr. Abrams entered to find Maxwell conscious, weak, pale, but awake. His eyes scanned the ceiling and saw Sophie's painted stars. He smiled. You came back, he whispered, voice like wind through dry leaves. Dr. Abrams wept. 2 weeks later, Maxwell returned home. He had to wear a mask and gloves. Visitors were limited, but he was home, and he was alive. At his welcome back dinner held in the library, because it was the coziest room. According to Sophie, Maxwell raised his glass of watered-down juice. I don't know how to thank you, he said, voice steady now. You already did, Emily replied. You came back. Sophie beamed. I finished your heart. Michael played a simple piano melody that slowly layered into a full harmony. Daniel stood and placed a hand on Maxwell's shoulder. We didn't save you, he said. You saved us first. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, Maxwell returned to the garden. The moon bathed the yard in silver. Leaves stirred gently as if whispering old secrets. He stood beneath the oak tree they planted for Rebecca. He placed a letter at its base. They saved me, Rebecca, just like you hoped they would, just like you knew they could. And then he looked up at the stars, for once, not as distant, unreachable things, but as memories written in light, because the storm had passed, and they had built their fort together. 5 years had passed since the storm. The Grant Mansion, once a hollow monument to wealth, now pulsed with life in every corner. Walls once hung with sterile modern art now bore framed family photos, children's paintings, and hand-stitched tapestries. The air was laced with music, with the hum of meals being prepared, debates being waged over board games, and footsteps that no longer echoed, but danced. Maxwell Grant, now 63, sat at the long dining table, freshly polished, but no longer just for show. His silver hair had thinned, his gait had slowed, but his presence had never been stronger. He was no longer Maxwell Grant, CEO of Grant Enterprises. He was simply Dad. Emily entered first, confident in a charcoal blazer and high heels, scrolling through her phone and correcting legal briefs under her breath. She had just been offered a full-time fellowship in family psychology, her dissertation titled The Chosen Bond, the Neuroscience of Adoptive Family Attachment. "I need a quote from you," she said, not even glancing up. "Something dramatic, like empire building, but make it emotional." Maxwell smiled. "Try this. Family is the only merger that can't be undone." Emily froze mid-scroll. "Okay, that's actually solid." Daniel entered next, now 21, tall and composed. His shoulders squared like his father's once were. He held a prototype medical device in his hands. "We got FDA breakthrough status for the marrow extraction system," he said, pride flickering in his otherwise reserved voice. "It's going into human trials. That tech saved you. It'll save others now." "You saved me," Maxwell corrected. Michael followed, wearing a sleek black turtleneck, earbuds in, the scent of graphite and jazz clinging to him like perfume. His orchestral suite, Reconstruction, had just debuted with the New York Philharmonic. He said nothing as he entered, just gave a nod and slid a composition book in front of his father. On the cover, "For the Man Who Became Music." Then came Sophie, now 17, a walking spectrum of color and paint-splattered jeans, leading the committee for the final installation at the Grant Foundation's new headquarters. Her exhibit, "The Faces of Foster, 1,000 Portraits of Forgotten Kids Who Found Homes." "You're not allowed to cry until after the ribbon cutting," she warned, pointing at Maxwell with a paintbrush. We agreed. Maxwell raised both hands in mock surrender, but emotion was already gathering like thunderclouds behind his eyes. Because today wasn't just any day. Today was the public opening of the Rebecca Wilson Grant Foundation, headquartered in a 12-story building in the heart of Manhattan, built not of steel and glass, but of stories. The ceremony was held in the rooftop garden. Surrounded by the skyline Maxwell once ruled with an iron grip. Now, he stood here not as a king but as a survivor, a father, a living monument to a truth wealth could never buy. The garden overflowed with guests, doctors, advocates, journalists, families who had once stood where Maxwell had stood, at the edge of loss, searching for meaning. A bronze sculpture stood at the center of the garden. A woman's figure with arms open, reaching skyward. Rebecca. Emily had designed the expression. Michael had composed the music playing from hidden speakers. Daniel had overseen the DNA reconstruction used to model her face. Sophie had painted the story of her sacrifice in winding mural pots that wrapped around the fountain base. Maxwell stepped to the podium. He didn't speak from notes. He didn't need to. "I once built towers to be remembered. Now I understand. It's not what you build, it's who you hold that matters." He paused, letting the silence breathe. 25 years ago, I lost the only woman who ever saw me as more than my ambition. I thought I lost her forever, but I was wrong. She left behind something far greater than I ever deserved, for miracles, not broken children survivors, not orphans my blood, not burdens my legacy. He turned to look at his children. I didn't find them. They found me. Or maybe love did. Then his voice broke. I thought I was saving them, but the truth is, they saved me. The audience stood, applauding, some weeping. Maxwell stepped away from the podium. His children joined him, arms around one another, around him, and for the first time in his life, Maxwell felt what every deal, every dollar, every boardroom had failed to give him: wholeness. Later that night, the family gathered in the garden beneath string lights. "I'd have something for you," Maxwell said, pulling out a small box. He handed each child an envelope. Inside, they found official documents. He was transferring control of the foundation to them. Not upon his death. Not someday. Now. "I built empires with contracts," he said, "but I built this with you, and only you can carry it forward." Emily blinked back tears. "You trust us?" Maxwell smiled. "I trust you with the only thing that ever mattered." Michael whispered, "Legacy." Maxwell nodded. Daniel looked at the paperwork. "It's clean, legally sound, efficient." "Of course it is," Maxwell said with a wink. Then Sophie gasped, Beneath her envelope was a small box. Inside, a ring her mother's, a gold band with a garnet stone, Rebecca's. Maxwell said. She left it in a drawer. I didn't know what it meant until now. Sophie slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Weeks later, Maxwell returned to the mansion alone one evening. The house was quieter now. His children, his legacy, were running the foundation, starting their lives, dreaming big in ways he could have never imagined. He walked to the tree planted in Rebecca's honor and sat on the bench. Beneath it, in his hands, was a letter, one he'd never written, one he always meant to. He read it aloud under the moonlight. Dear Rebecca, I failed you once. I didn't see the signs. I let you carry a burden alone, but you gave me a second chance. Through them, I see you in every word Emily writes, every formula Daniel perfects, every note Michael plays, every color Sophie paints. They are you. And now, they are the world. I love you. I always did. M. He folded the letter and placed it at the base of the tree. A breeze stirred the leaves, and for a moment, he swore he heard her laugh light and free rising through the branches like a song. Remembered? Epilogue. 1 year later, a new family stepped into the Grant Foundation, a woman. The boys, a girl with downcast eyes. They were nervous, fragile. They had just lost everything. And then Sophie approached, kneeling before the girl. Want to see something cool? She asked. Handing her a paintbrush, Emily offered a reassuring hand. To the mother, Daniel handed the boys science kits. Michael sat at the piano and began to play. And from a nearby window, Maxwell watched, a faint smile on his face. The cycle had begun again. Not a charity dot, but a family dot of legacy, dot of love.